What's up, y'all? Luke Jean here, back with another video. Today's video is going to be a bit shorter, but it's going to be very important. If you haven't been following the news, the Unification Church is under threat of dissolution from the Japanese government. And I want to explain from a legal perspective, not my own association with the church, not my personal feelings, not the UN's religious freedom. I want to go into the Japanese laws regarding religious body dissolution. And I decided to research this topic because there's a petition going around from the Family Federation in the United States to sign a petition to alert President Trump of the impending religious freedom violations. And I decided, well, before I go and sign and share this, I want to do some due diligence. I want to do some research. And let me tell you, what the Japanese government is doing and the case against the Unification Church will have radical legal precedents for the future of all religious bodies in Japan. And I'm going to explain why. So, a little background. 2 years ago, Prime Minister Shinzo Abe was shot to death by a disgruntled former second-generation unificationist member named Tetsuyama Yamagami. And his motivation was that Shinzo Abe had strong ties to the Unification Church and was garnering support for the church within the Japanese government. And his mother was a member of this church, and she was a victim of solicitation malpractice. She was solicited by the church on numerous occasions to donate large sums of money to the church. And she wasn't the only one. This family wasn't the only one that was a victim. And let me be clear, these people are victims of solicitous malpractice and financial malpractice by the Unification Church of Japan. There are, according to one legal analyst, 32 cases that have been won in civil court against the Unification Church. And the Unification Church has offered to create a fund of around 68 million yen, or dollars, I forget exactly. Currency conversion's a bit tricky. Millions of dollars as a compensation fund for victims of such malpractice. And because of this assassination of Shinzo Abe, the malpractice of the Unification Church in Japan was given a huge spotlight. And the Japanese government, specifically the Ministry of Education, Culture, Sports, Technology, and Science, or MEXT for short, because that is a really long name, filed a request to dissolve the Unification Church. And this was their complaint. I read, from around 1980 to 2023, the UC believers caused significant damage to many people by making them donate or buy goods by restricting their free decision and preventing their normal judgment, which resulted in disrupting the peaceful life of many people, including the family members of the guests, newcomers to the church, by means of the following conducts. Now, this case has lasted over 2 years, and it's been going through the courts. And in the meantime, there's been a lot of litigation and a lot of light shined on these malpractices. Now, despite the malpractices, the Japanese government wishes to dissolve a religious body. And that's where things get complicated. Now, let us turn to Japanese law. I'm going to turn to the Religious Corporations Act, or the RCA, and I'm going to refer to Article 81, which talks about the prerequisites to be able to dissolve a religious body. This is under the law what you need to find. It says, when the court finds that a cause which falls under any of the following items exists with regard to a religious corporation, it may order the dissolution of the religious corporation at the request of the competent authority, an interest person, or public prosecutor, and by its own authority, if they are in violation of laws and regulations that religious corporation commits an act which is clearly found to harm public welfare substantially. This is a translation of Japanese law, so it can be a bit rough. But the key is, in order for a religious body to be ordered to dissolve, it must be in violation of laws and regulations that are clearly found to harm the public welfare substantially. Now, is the Unification Church harming the public welfare through its solicitation and financial malpractice? You could argue, and I would say yes, it is. However, is it a violation of criminal law or civil law? And that's the big point of vagueness within the law. It doesn't specify criminal or civil law. Now this, if you aren't familiar with law, is a very important distinction, because to use Japanese terminology, the Unification Church has been found guilty in what are called torts, which you can find in Article 709 of Part 3 of the Civil Code. So Japanese government, just like the United States, has a criminal set of courts and realm, if you will, and a criminal code and a civil code and civil courts. It's the exact same thing as in the United States. Well, not exactly, but broadly speaking, it's very similar. Now, what is a tort? And what happens if you believe that you have a tort against someone? Article 709 of the Civil Code states that a person that has intentionally or negligently infringed the rights or legally protected interests of another person is liable to compensate for damage resulting in consequence. So, for example, let's say I get in a car accident and it's the other person's fault. They rear-end me, it's a red light, they rear-end me. Hypothetical. They don't have car insurance. So I have what's called a tort against them. So I need to go to not criminal court, although they'll probably receive a citation for not having insurance, but even that's in the civil realm, right? Tickets in traffic are by and large civil infractions, so you go to civil court, not criminal court. If it's criminal, you are mandated to go to court or are under arrest. Let's say, going back to this car accident scenario, if I want to seek the damages because I have a tort, because they have intentionally or negligently infringed the rights of me, I go to civil court. Think of Judge Judy. I go to civil court and I sue for, say, $5,000, which is the maximum in many civil courts in the United States. And that's exactly what's been happening with the Unification Church. There have been, according to legal analysts, 32 successful cases brought in the civil court against the Unification Church. That does not mean they committed a crime. And if you're thinking in your head or you want to say to me, Luke Jean, solicitous malpractice, financial malpractice, isn't that wrong? Isn't that a crime? Well, the crime that they're alleging is that these members of the church in Japan were manipulated to the point where their freedom was completely taken away. And I wrote a whole academic paper in my undergraduate, my capstone paper, on in large part brainwashing practices. And what is going on in Japan is not classified as brainwashing. It is not. You can check it out at seekingthe12gates.blogspot.com. It is not brainwashing. The most you can argue is that they are being what's called love bombed, which is basically, as a new member, you're brought into a space or a workshop or whatever, and everyone's loving you up so much and making you feel so important that it overwhelms your psychological faculties and you want to stay, and then you are eventually susceptible to be able to do many inappropriate things, oftentimes. But that's a very weak argument, because love bombing happens in every single religion with a new guest if they're serious. Think of Christian megachurches, for example. Love bombing, if you want to use that argument, is very weak for brainwashing. These people are not being brainwashed, but they are suing successfully in civil court, as they should, by the way, because malpractice is malpractice. But none of these cases are within the criminal realm. And this is the big question. In the statute, does it allow for civil infractions to warrant religious body dissolution? And there's very little legal precedent for this. The analysts can only find one case, and it's a pretty extreme one. It's a pretty big one. It's the case of Shuigo in 1996. He was a leader of a cult, but it was a cult that intended to commit mass murder through toxic gas. So, of course, the government wants to not only arrest him and, prosecute him and all these things. They want to dissolve this cult because they want to commit mass murder with toxic gas. But his defense and the cult's defense brought all the way up to the Supreme Court the argument that you can't dissolve the cult because it goes against the Religious Freedom Clause in Article 20 of Japan's Constitution. But this is what the court found. It found that thus the regulation on religious organizations by the law solely addresses the eclectic aspect, in other words, those relating to other parts of society, and does not extend to its spiritual or religious aspects. The law does not intend to interfere with the freedom of religion, such as the conduct of religious rituals by the believers. Now, if you're a hardcore Moonie and you want to make the argument that the fundraising practices of the church are religious in nature, let me tell you, that is a weak argument. Do not use that argument. That is weak. Don't tell the victims that have been manipulated and coerced and pestered by other members of their church in Japan to donate large sums of money which they don't have, like this shooter's mother. Don't tell me that's part of a religious practice. If it is, I think it should be yanked quickly. But I don't think it is. And please don't say it is, because that's a very weak argument. The stronger argument is that what you can take from this very vague ruling is that the court ruled in this case that when you dissolve a religious body, you need to do it in a way that most minimally affects the religious believers and their ability to practice the faith. That's very key. They have to do it in a way that minimally affects the religious believer. So basically what it's saying is it needs to be a high enough problem in eclastic aspect, a negative eclastic aspect. It has to be high enough to warrant its dissolution. And that goes back to the second part of the clause in the RCA, which says the religious corporation commits an act which is clearly found to harm public welfare substantially. So even though it doesn't make the distinction between civil law and criminal law, the precedent is kind of high to dissolve a religious body. That's kind of what it set. Because it said, okay, yes, destroy, dissolve, destroy, make sure the murderous death cult that wants to murder us with toxic gas never comes back. But you still, you still have to make sure the believers can practice the religious and spiritual parts of it, as long as it doesn't affect the public welfare. So this is kind of what the Japanese government is kind of leeching on, including the Prime Minister Fumio Kishida in 2022, because he argued in a House committee that, quote, an illegal act under the Civil Code in cases where the act is found to be organized, malicious, and continuous meets the requirements under religious corporations law. Now, opposition disagreed, but that's the precedent, that's the importance of this case. This case determines if a religious body can be shut down because of any type of civil lawsuit or any violation of civil code, any tort case. Now think of it in the United States. Think of your church. Let's say someone accidentally falls down the stairs and they sue you in civil court for injuries. Apply it to this law, this precedent. If the Prime Minister had his interpretation, that church could be permanently dissolved because someone accidentally tripped. Permanently. It could be permanently dissolved if some of its members were committing some sort of malpractice. That wasn't brainwashing. That wasn't criminal coercion. Big difference between criminal and civil. That's the precedent. It's not even just about religious freedom. It is in the sense that the Japanese government is leeching onto this vague clause in the RCA to try and use that vagueness to kick the Unification Church out of the Japanese society, because that's basically what would happen. I mean, already Unificationists are under some intense scrutiny and persecution just for their religious beliefs. But it's even more than that. It's a dangerous precedent for the government to go after any religious body, any body in general they do not like, just because they were sued even once. That is dangerous. That's very dangerous. It's a huge door to authoritarianism, and it's wrong. It's wrong. Two wrongs do not make a right. Even though, yes, the Unification Church in Japan and some of its members were wrong to manipulate those like Yamagami's mother. They were wrong. But it's also wrong to exploit a vague clause in the law to take out an actor that you don't like. The Japanese government and the left-leaning side of that government, because the LCP, Shinzo Abe's party, was more conservative. It's not to say liberal or conservative is right or wrong. It's just that's the facts. The opposition wants to kick out the Unification Church and kick it out of its influence on politicians for its own gain by using a vague loophole that will have radical, dramatic ramifications for Japan and all religions there, all of them, Christian churches included, Buddhists included, Jews included, everyone, Muslims included, everyone will be included in this ruling. Everyone, any church, any Christian church that is a bit too noisy, if they were sued even once, this is the precedent. Because if you're sued once and you can find a few members of the public that were affected, well, they violated the civil code and it impacted public welfare. Now, that's not the case that the 1996 case gives, but it's too vague. You can reinterpret it if you want. And that's the real issue. So that's why I signed this petition, because it's dangerous for this type of precedent to be set. Dangerous. And you think that it's just going to be relegated to Japan, but you watch. Other countries will see exactly how the Japanese government did it and try and exploit the same loopholes. So if you're interested in signing, it's in the description. If you want to read my blog post on this and brainwashing in general, you can check out seekingthe12gates.blogspot.com. Thank you for watching, and I hope that you sign and that, more than anything, that you really research and look at the world around you and the precedents that are set by your actions, the actions of your government, and the actions of the world.